Luca, so good to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Aneesh. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here on your podcast.
So, let me set some context. I had an episode on the podcast where we were talking about the animal diet. And a few weeks later, someone tags me on this reaction video that you've made. And I immediately messaged you and said, hey, listen, just come on the podcast. And I started that episode by saying that when I talk about nutrition and nutrition related stuff, I will talk to people who believe in different lifestyles, different diets, and that is the objective for me, right? To understand from people who practice it, who have seen the advantages on themselves. It's not just theoretical preaching or knowledge, but you live, you put your money where your mouth is, and you're definitely one such person. So I really want to first get into your journey into veganism, and then we'll actually start to break down multiple points.
That sounds truly amazing. And yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share like the opposite type or point of view to the guest that you had. And again, I don't want to make it sound like this is like a hating debate or something
Yeah.
like that. This is a healthy debate to be having and just sharing different points and especially facts backed up by evidence. That's also what I try to do with my platform. Those that follow me, they know that I want to be basically creating a healthy and thriving community that we can not actually, or we should not fear to share opposite points of view, because that's honestly, I believe, how we can grow. And so I totally share your philosophy with the podcast that you're having here. So amazing job.
So, Luca, let's get into your journey and how you arrived at this.
Yes. So that's so the starting point. We actually have to turn the clock 15 years, 15 plus years ago, backwards. That's where I basically started adopting a plant-based diet. So my journey started non-related to veganism at all, because veganism, and we will get to that part, is an ethical stance and moral stance that you're actually holding. My journey started due to health reasons. Like every time I ate, I had an inflamed stomach, I had an inflamed gut. Um, I also had, you know, kind of like it made me feel like I had to throw up the food that I just ate, although I didn't actually had to throw up. So it sounds a little bit weird, I know, but and yeah, I went to different doctors, and we have amazing doctors here, but for some reason they couldn't find like the true culprit. And by chance, we went to another one, and he actually suggested to eat a plant-based diet. And Anish, you have to know that 15 plus years ago, the word vegan wasn't really known here. Nobody knew the word vegan back then. They even called people that ate a plant based diet or were vegan, not vegans, but strict vegetarians. So that's how far behind we have to turn the clock backwards. And I basically still remember the first meal I ate. It was spelt bread with some tomato slices on top of it with a little bit of olive oil. And I ate that, and it was the first meal in ages, or it felt like it was the first meal in ages, which I really enjoyed. And that was the starting point where I've started to feel amazing again. And I basically, yeah, I never had these health issues again. And overall, well, I didn't had the best diet to begin with, to be honest, but overall started eating much better, incorporating more whole plant-based foods. And I also wanted to see, is this healthy long term? Because in my surroundings, I didn't know anybody who ate a plant-based diet long term. And to my surprise, that's also how I got, passionate about studies, reading it. To my surprise, there were some studies done on people eating plant-based, and they actually did quite good, to be honest, in the longevity time for census, and also with all-cause mortality risks. All-cause mortality is simply the most common diseases that are top killers in the world, if you want it to put it very simply. So yeah, that's where basically my journey started. And yeah,
So
uh,
15 years back, and you were eating everything before?
yes, I was an traditional Italian, born and raised in Switzerland. So we had the Swiss cuisine mixed with
Oh, that's
Italian
beautiful.
cuisine. So as you can imagine, tons of cheese, dairy products, meat products. And if you were to ask me, like back in the days, Luca, when did you had your last vegetables or fruit? I couldn't answer it.
Yeah,
So
fair
yeah,
enough. And it's been 15 years since, right?
yes.
The other thing we're gonna deep dive into later is like you're also a fit person, right? You also work out. It's not just because a lot of times that worry is that okay, if you have to be working out heavy like you, uh, being vegan may not be the best thing. So let's tap into what is veganism all around.
Yes. So many people, and again, I don't want to point finger towards people that say this.
Yeah,
It's just, maybe they're not provided with the information, they read something online. And again, I don't judge people using this term, but actually, and I'm using it sometimes as well to make the communication much easier. But the term vegan diet doesn't exist, to be honest, because what veganism is an ethical and moral stance in which one seeks to reduce animal cruelty or suffering as best as you possibly can. And that's it. All the other side benefits that I guess we will also touch upon are just a great side effects, to be honest. But one could actually be vegan just eating vegan chips all day, which obviously isn't healthy,
yeah.
and still be considered vegan. So, yeah, it's just a moral and ethical stance. That's what veganism truly is about. And a plant based diet just happens to be part of this philosophy, if you so will. So, a vegan diet actually doesn't really exist, but again, even scientists use it in studies. Like when you type in vegan diet on PubMed, in which you can find all the studies, you quite a lot of research papers will pop up with vegan diet as the title sometimes. So I get it why it's so confusing. Yeah, I just
So
wanted to
so
clear it up.
plant-based diet would be the right terminology then.
Exactly. But again, I'm not one. I know some people that get mad at it. Honestly, I don't understand it. It's semantics, if you want to call it that way. So it's all good if you use the word vegan diet.
Yes.
I just wanted to use this chance to say what veganism actually is. It's just a philosophy, if you so will.
Why saying when you say why people getting so mad? It's the internet. People, I think it's recreational anger. People are just angry at anything. Could be the stupidest thing possible.
You're
Let's get
right.
into plant-based diet, right? You do a lot of work to demystify things, or try to uh, perhaps bust some myths and so on and so forth. For you, what are your most broad or general asked questions around plant-based diet? Like, what is the stuff that you hear the most that you're like, guys, this is not true?
This is a fabulous question. And the answer to that is there are actually many myths circulating, as with actually, as you touched upon earlier, as with many topics online, there's so many myths surrounding it. So, one of the most common ones is obviously since I try to build as much muscle as I possibly can, people usually always ask me the question, what about proteins? And with proteins, we can actually divide kind of like the questions and the myths that come up into two categories. The bioavailability of proteins, meaning how many proteins can you actually absorb for them from plant-based food sources, and can you get enough proteins from plants? And those are actually two topics that usually always come up. On the ethic science of point, there are also quite a lot of things. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the videos, but people saying that you actually cause more suffering and death if you go vegan due to crop deaths. And there are also many other myths. So this is a topic that you and I guess, can spend hours upon
Yeah.
talking touching upon all these topics. But maybe we want to focus on a couple of topics. Maybe we
I
can
think
focus.
let's start with protein, because I think that's something that's very very common. It's a very common question, right? Especially if you are looking to work out and put on muscle.
Yes. So the reason why so many people think that plant proteins are inferior to animal-based proteins is basically, and now we are actually going backwards in time again. Like a couple of decades ago, or maybe 1 decade ago, I can't fully remember, the DIS score was introduced. The DIS score is the digestible indispensable amino acid score. Sounds like a mouthful, but all there is, it's basically a scoring system which determines how many amino acids, and amino acids are basically the building blocks for proteins. You can kind of see it, amino acids, as Lego blocks that you have to stick and glue together in order to build proteins. That's what they are. And due to the DIS score, plant proteins scored not so good in the scoring system. And that's how many people, even to this day, still feel like plant proteins. And another myth is basically that plants don't have all the 9 essential amino acids. That's also something that we can briefly touch upon, because that's simply not true.
And this is
But
what you spoke about on the reel, right? The reaction video to my episode.
yes, so every single plant has all the 9 essential amino acids. And essential means we cannot synthesize those amino acids, meaning our bodies cannot synthesize it. So we have to eat it through our diet. And every single plant has all the 9 essential amino acids. Doesn't matter if you talk about broccoli, rocket salad, nuts, seeds, whole grains, it doesn't really matter. What, however, is different is the concentration of the amino acids found in different type of plant foods. And that's where the confusion usually gets created, I guess. But all protein originates in the soil in form of plants. I mean, we mammals, as are the cows that we eat, uh, we don't create protein by ourselves, basically, or amino acids, I should say. So they have to eat the plants as well in order to get them, because to mammals, those amino acids are also essential. The same as with omega-3, for example, for the fish. It's essential for the fish, and they have to eat it through the algae. So it's that kind of process. But circling back to proteins, basically, and the bioavailability, which I guess also is a huge topic on the internet right now. If you look at what the DI score is and how it's basically determined, a couple of things become clear. And it has a couple of limitations. So the DI score is usually used by the FAO, which combats world hunger. That's their mission. So we are talking about starving people here. People in countries, sadly, that they don't have access to supermarkets, or if they do, they may not have money to buy certain things there. And they looked at food in isolation, basically. And that's the first limitation, meaning they didn't actually give the animals, another topic, another limitation that I will touch upon soon. They gave those animals foods in isolation, meaning they gave beans in isolation, peas in isolation, nuts, seeds, meat, dairy products, and whatever they actually wanted to test.
That makes no sense even to a layperson. Like that itself doesn't make sense. But please go on.
Exactly. Like on a day-to-day practice, I don't know anybody who just eats potatoes all days. Again, you find different diets out there, and I guess some people watching this are just eating potatoes. That's not a knock on you. I
Yeah.
just say for the vast majority, and we need to talk in general when we talk to people, because we're reaching thousands of people, we cannot include the special kind of cases every single time. Otherwise, you would have, during each video, you would have to make so many explanation points,
Yeah.
and people would just get bored of it. So, but aside from that, foods in isolation is the first part. The second limitation is it was mostly tested on rodents and pigs. And last time I checked, although they are similar with humans, they are not really humans. And we always want to see if we can replicate results that we have from animal studies in human studies, in human outcome data, which we have nowadays. But that's something that I will touch also a little bit later because I want to finish with the DI score. Other limitations are, again, the absorption of the amino acids. That's also a little bit different in animals, and so on and so forth. But one of the biggest limitation was actually that they gave the food not only in isolation, but also in the raw form. So the pigs were eating raw lentils, raw chickpeas, legumes. And I don't know about you, but it's like eating stones if you eat
Yeah.
legumes raw, kind of like. So a bunch of me, you can see that it has a bunch of limitation. Again, in the sense of starving people, telling people that just can eat maybe one or two types of different foods, it makes total sense to use the scoring system. But in studies, even scientists referred to that. The DI score gets commonly misused and it shouldn't actually be used for people that have access to tons of food and especially not on athletes that want to build muscles. So that's where the misconception comes from. The more interesting angle is what does the data say when we compare a plant-based diet to an omnivorous diet and we match the proteins, calories, and leucine intake. Leucine is one of the 9 essential amino acids, which kind of like activates some protein complexes that then actually correlates or kind of like to muscle growth called mTOR. But that's not have been fully studied yet, and we don't know the kind of mechanisms yet 100%, but they tried to match everything. And we have a couple of studies, not a lot, but I always tell people, we should always adjust our point of view to the new data that comes out and to the best data we have available. And the best data we have available are those said studies. And when we compared kind of like the two different diets with crossover trials, meaning they had one group eat the omnivorous diet and the other group the plant-based diet, and then they switched the groups. Once you actually did that, they saw no significant differences, or actually no differences at all between these two diets. So it basically, the lack of concentration within the plant foods gets nullified once you reach a certain caloric intake, basically. So again, once new data comes out and it shows like, hey, animal-based proteins are clearly better than plant proteins, I'm happy. Well, I'm not happy because I'm vegan, but I will adjust my point of view, obviously, because we have to be objective, even about veganism as well. So, but as of
So
right now, yeah.
there are also so many nuances to this, right? If you're a pro athlete or an enthusiast, uh, I would count myself as a enthusiast, fitness enthusiast, right? I think we would still, if tomorrow I was to look at a vegan, I won't say vegan diet, plant based diet. Uh, I think I will make sure that I get enough protein. If I have to work a little harder on the prep and all, and this whole protein thing is also very nuanced, right? Like, let's say someone who's a pro athlete, you have enough people at your disposal and enough data and trainers and nutritionists to figure everything out for you. Someone like me, I would call myself a fitness enthusiast. If I need a certain amount of protein intake on a daily basis, I'll do a little more work. I think the most common thing thrown at veganism is that plant-based diet is that you have to do so much more work and so much more prep. So be it. If that's the case, no worries. You can do extra prep. I'm not averse to that. But for regular people, right? Uh, how much more do they perhaps need to eat? Rather, how much more carbs do they have to eat to get that much protein? Because I think that's again a very common question, that to get the same amount of protein, you have to eat so much more food, which means you have to eat so much more carbs and fats versus just more lean protein.
Yes, that's another great question as well. And this is actually a true valid question. Because if you just go in, jump right into the cold water, and you're like, hey, I'm going vegan overnight, I'm eating a plant-based diet overnight. Um, every diet needs to be planned, whether it is a plant-based diet or not. If you are into muscle building or into health or optimizing your health, you always want to plan your diet. Doesn't matter if it's plant-based or not. But when we actually talk about protein, vegans, or plant-based sources, I should say, then I would recommend to especially look into the calorie density of certain foods. What do I mean by that? 100 grams of spinach, for example, fresh spinach, not cooked one or frozen one, has around 20 to 30 calories, for example. That's not a lot. And this is one of the first or the biggest mistake people do. They just try to not replace certain foods that they ate, but they just exclude certain foods and put in a bunch of low caloric dense foods on their plates, and they start feeling energy deprived, sleep deprived. And the list goes on with all the side effects that a low energy diet or a low caloric diet can actually come with. But if you look at the high protein sources, usually my go-to are nuts, seeds, beans, and especially tofu, tempeh, dehydrated soy, which I know is very popular over there in India as well. Dehydrated soy has, depending on the brand, 100 grams of protein, has almost 50 grams of proteins. 100 grams of soy basically has 51 grams of protein. Soy flakes, which you can use, for example, instead of oats, or you mixing with oats, because I'm a big believer of eating a great variety of plant foods. If you mix oats with soy flakes has per 100 grams, 100 calories, no, 100 grams, it has 400 calories, which is quite a lot, but 41 grams of protein. So you can see that you just have to find those kind of products and inform yourself. But honestly, the best way to do that obviously is hire a coach. But if you don't have the money to do that, no worries. Go to Google, go to any search engine you're using, type in high protein vegan sources, and a bunch of lists come up, and you cannot go wrong with that. Apart from that, if you eat enough calories, it's hard to create a protein deficient diet on a plant-based diet, or actually any diet overall, because protein is found anywhere. Doesn't matter what diet you're following, basically.
Well, you mentioned soy. Another common question: am I going to get man boobs if I have too much soy?
So yeah, I'm glad that you touched upon this. So gynecomastia, that's what usually those man boobs are called, is a serious kind of like disease, which aesthetically it's actually, by the way, it's not dangerous, but obviously it's not aesthetically pleasing to the eye, as many people would actually say. If you go to PubMed, which is basically like the search engine, if you want to find certain studies, and you type in soy gynecomastia or phytoestrogens, phyto, by the way, means plants, so plants estrogens, um, you can find over 4,000 studies. Out of these 4,000 studies, you can just find two case studies. And the case study is basically like the name implies, it's just one person and they follow just one case. And even in those case study, the researcher named the study an unusual case. So it's not a very common occurring case in which a man drank 3 liters of soy milk every single day and he developed gynecomastia.
Yeah.
And once he reduced that or actually eliminated soy from the diet, the gynecomastia basically started to go away slowly. So that's, I guess, where the myth came from. However, there's a meta-analysis, meaning they combined tons of randomized control trials, which is kind of like the gold standard on the scientific side. And they basically came to the conclusion that soy does not only not alter your hormones inside your body, but it's actually health beneficial for you. But let me preface this by saying that just because the data shows that it's clearly not, harmful for you and will not cause man boobs, doesn't mean that you are not one of those unlucky ones, because 1 in a million, maybe, or 1 in 10 million might have soy hypersensitivity, meaning that if you drink soy milk, you might can develop man boobs from that. But again, it's a very unusual case actually, and it
Also,
occurred.
don't drink 3 liters of soy milk to begin with.
That's a takeaway from this episode. Yes.
How do you how do you get away from milk from a lifestyle choice, right? Like India is a very big milk consuming country. We have milk in like we have curd with almost every meal of ours. India is a very big tea drinking country, but we don't drink our tea black. We have it with milk. Pretty much universally, 99.9% people would have tea like that. For someone like me who's not enjoyed the taste of milk, I do love my cheese. And to me, it's just that okay, milk I can perhaps get away with. You can have almond milk, coconut milk, whatever. But cheese, no vegan cheese is replacing it, Italian or French cheese, as I'm sure you would. You might agree to that. What are what are these like? How do you come over these kind of taste biases that we have, right? Because it's not easy. Like to convince someone to get off cheese is it's pretty tough.
Oh, I feel you, especially with the cheese topic. So I was kind of quote unquote forced to go plant based due to my health, and honestly, I didn't miss meat at all. But the one thing I missed the most was cheese. There
Yeah.
was no pasta plate without as much cheese on top of it as pasta, basically for me. So I used to be a huge cheese lover. So I totally get where you're coming from. And it's also a valid question because we always have certain foods that we love to eat. And if we decide to kind of like quote unquote adopt a different type of nutrient pattern, basically like a plant based diet, for example, obviously you have to exclude some of maybe your loved products that we all have grown up with and we used or still are actually loving the taste of it. What I basically started noticing after a couple of weeks when I turned to a plant based diet is that your taste buds will start to change. The first few weeks were rough for me because, again, I jumped into the cold water and I went plant based overnight. And I was obviously still eating pasta, but without the cheese on top of it. After a couple of weeks, I started noticing something, and I know to some people this might sound dumb, but it was so true for me. We used to make pasta with tons of tomato sauce and so on and so forth. And I started after 3 weeks feeling out the tomato from the tomato sauce much more. And I remember I looked at my mother, I'm like, Mama, this tomato sauce tastes like real tomato to me today, which is
Yeah.
weird because I always was used to throwing in so much cheese on top of it, which has a lot more taste, in the sense of the taste density, if that's even a word. And your taste buds will change if you basically stick to a certain eating pattern. Now, not everybody has the willpower to do so and has as great of a motivation as I did back in the day. How I usually or what approach I usually use for my clients when I started coaching people that want to, adopt a plant-based diet is the following. I start I always ask my clients before I start creating a meal plan, how or what does a usual day what how does an eating day for you look like? What are your go-to meals throughout the day? What's your favorite breakfast, lunch, and dinner? And then I will create meals that are very similar to those. which make the transition much easier. When it comes to cheese, however, I'm with you. Most of the cheese alternatives I don't like.
Yeah.
And even if I look at the ingredients, I'm like, yeah, yeah. I'm leaving that on the side. However, for some reason, and maybe that's also available to you in India, um, cashew cheese, fermented cashew cheese tastes amazing. And I know I always wanted to try this. I know you Indians have amazing cashew plant like plantations and
Yeah,
so on and
we
so
do.
forth. So maybe there's some cashew cheese that tastes amazing, but it will not really, get close to the cheese taste, something like that. But it's a great and healthy alternative to basically like cheese products. But what I wanted to say is the more you stick to a diet pattern, the more likely you're going to not only miss those food items that you used to eat less, but you're starting to feel different. Your taste buds will change, how you basically feed yourself, you feel lighter, and so on and so forth. So, a couple of great things will happening that will hopefully distract you as well. But we all have those foods that we are addicted to, which again, I don't want to make it sound that cheese is unhealthy, but there are certain food items that we stick to which are unhealthy, and we might want to limit that or so. But it will happen. We just have to be patient.
On the nutrition side, I want to wrap up a few things on the nutrition side and move on to uh, a few more things that might be more India specific. But when I look at Game Changers, right, the documentary that came out, I was very impressed halfway through because it's all athletes who are at their prime, apart from Schwarzenegger, I think, who's not at his prime, but most people are talking about how it's had a big impact on them and stuff like that. But at some point, I think in the second half, it just seemed like propaganda. It's like, okay, I get it, but now you're just saying it's better than anything else. It's better than anything else. And that, at least to me, was trying to put me off. It was putting me off in a way that I want to understand this, but I don't want this overwhelming view that this is the best thing, right? Which to me is what Game Changers did. But one thing it did try and establish was that you can get enough protein, you can get enough nutrients. So I just want to close the conversation on the nutrient side and uh, what are the kind of resources people can go to? Like you said, Google, but are there other more specific websites you can suggest where someone can at least start to plan out their basic entry into a more plant based diet?
So that's another great question. And yeah, shout out to Game Changers. I truly love the documentary as well. I know James Wilkes, not personally, but we've interacted online with, and he's a totally chill dude. Like, he's a really great and very knowledgeable guy. But circling back to your question, it's the best thing you can actually do. And this actually is an advice for every diet out there. If we look at the longest living healthy people out there, there's something called the blue zone diets, which expands over several demographics, meaning we have one or two in Europe, we have in South America one, we have in Japan one, and so on and so forth. If you combine all these diets, which are obviously different from each other, you can see a pattern. The vast majority of the calories in the blue zone diets with the healthiest centenarians, that's how they are called, people living over 100, um, they have all of one thing in common. The vast majority of the calories they are eating comes from whole plant-based foods. Notice how I said the vast majority. Now, there's one group in this blue zone diet called the Health Adventists. They eat just whole plant-based foods due to religion's beliefs, basically. But the other kind of like populations, they eat the vast majority, so 90 to 95% of the calories come from whole plant-based foods. That's one thing. Obviously, there's other things that contribute to a healthy life. It's not just diet alone,
Yeah.
like the mindset, the community surrounding you, the activities, and so on and so forth. But we are just talking about the diet. Now, what you should be aiming for, and I know this sounds overwhelming, so take your steps one at a time. First things first, type in your favorite meals and type in the word Google in front of it. For example, if you're eating like spaghetti bolognese, or let's go with an Indian dish, tikka masala, for example.
Yeah.
Just type in the word vegan tikka masala. Super easy, and you often see that you just have to replace one ingredient, and it's already vegan. It's that easy sometimes. And from there, try to veganize it step by step and implementing more whole plant-based foods. Once you've done that, which might take for you 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month, 2 months. Again, I've worked with countless of people and each needs their time. Don't force it, don't stress it. And it's also not bad to still have some animal based products in that diet pattern that you want to have. Or maybe your goal is not to become vegan, just to eat more whole plant based foods in general. So take it easy and try to incorporate it one by one. Once you're doing that, then you want to hit the following groups on a daily basis, which you're trying to aim as well. You want to eat whole grains, you want to eat legumes, nuts and seeds, greeny leaf vegetables, and fruits, basically, with berries and so on and so forth. If you eat these groups every single day, and I know it sounds overwhelming, but you can easily hit those very, very easy, basically. For example, if you make yourself an oatmeal, like a porridge, you take some oats, you mix in some couple of different seeds and nuts and berries on top of it, and maybe a fruit, you already checked off a couple of boxes, right? So it sounds overwhelming. It is not, but take it step by step. Once you've done that, then one of the most important thing is, and this is something that I encourage everyone to do, go to your doctor and go make a blood test. See if you're lacking in a mineral, in a vitamin. Obviously, we all have to supplement something. It doesn't matter how good your diet is, depending where you live. For example, I live in Switzerland. I know you in India don't have these kind of problems, but we don't have a lot of sun here.
Oh,
So
we have too much.
well, I guess you're looking at the air in Mumbai, where you are staying, right? I don't know if the sun seeks through that kind of like thick pollution that you have over the Mumbai, but vitamin D3 gets produced once the sun touches your skin. That's how vitamin D gets produced. Obviously, we don't have a lot of sun here, although it's sunny right now, so I'm grateful for that. But I have to supplement vitamin D3. It doesn't matter what I'm eating, I have to do that. So, the best thing to do and see if you're lacking in something, do a blood test. And it's also great to do that. Depending how old you are, um, you might want to do it once, twice, or maybe even more per year. I do it once per year just to make sure. I did my last one in August and everything was good. But here comes the funny thing. You know what was way over the top?
Tell
B12.
me.
B12. Which is funny because you think vegans are lacking in B12, which every vegan should take a B12 supplement. But I was taking a B12 supplement every single day, and then I went and I saw that like it was 6 times over the maximum recommended range. And I was like, how can this be? And then I looked through my diet and I'm eating chlorella, which is an algae, which basically B12, I'm not sure if they add it or if B12 in the soil that they are growing that type of plant that I'm actually buying absorbs it from the soil. But I guess they're adding it to the chlorella powder. It has tons of B12 in it. So I was like, hey, the B12 supplement I'm taking, you know what? I'm taking it every second or third day from now on because although B12 is water soluble, meaning your body can easily get rid of it, um, yeah, why spend more money if I don't need it, right? So, and everything else,
Yeah.
by the way, was thankfully on point when I did the blood test. So that's the best way to do it. So from
M-
approach. So to summarize
My
it, yeah.
sorry, please go on.
So to summarize it, I know I went on this for quite a long time. To summarize it, what you want to do is type the word vegan in front of your favorite recipes that you're eating throughout the day. Try to make them more plant based, incorporate certain whole plant based foods. By the word, by the way, the word whole plant based foods means just unrefined plant foods. What do I mean by that? Instead of white flour, you're eating whole wheat flour, for example, or whole grain flour, whatever. Something, the whole food you're eating. Doesn't mean that you cannot bake or cook. It's allowed. Just cook your stuff, people. It's even worth it to absorb some nutrients. So if you do that, then you want to take it one step further. Then you want to incorporate it from the food groups that I said before. You start incorporating maybe some fruits and berries, for example, greeny leaf vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, and you will cover the vast majority of nutrients. And if you make a blood test, you might see if you need to supplement anything else.
So supplementing was my next question. That the other thing I hear when plant-based diets are bashed a little bit is that you always have to supplement. So, but I'm guessing that there would be truth to any diet with that, right? And like you pointed out, it could also be to do with where you stay.
100%. I'm making an extreme example. It doesn't matter how healthy your diet is. If you live in Switzerland, you have to supplement vitamin D3. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, they make it sound like it's a bad thing. Supplements are here to optimize something that you want to achieve, whether it's health or athletic performance, right? I mean, for example, let's talk about muscle building. What are most people doing that are into basically building muscles? First things first, they might are not, if you just start your journey and you don't have anybody surrounding you building muscles, then you're just going cold and you start maybe eating a little bit more protein rich foods. But you've done your research, you've looked up like, hey, where can I find protein, right? And then you find someone actually talking online about creatine, and then you start taking creatine and protein powders and so on and so forth. So you're totally right. Every diet out there needs a supplement if you want to basically optimize your health, and it's not a bad thing. It doesn't matter if it's plant-based or not. Just let me preface this by saying, if you go out on a plant-based diet, you have to take your B12 supplements. You have to, because B12, those are microbes usually found in the soil, and our soils are sadly contaminated um, with the wastes of animal agriculture or herbicides, pesticides used today. And it even gets added to the meat that people are eating or to the dairy products. So they add it in the process, basically. It's not like the animals build it on their own, because they also have to get it. Unless you're eating like maybe a gut, or I'm not sure if liver also has a decent amount of B12. I might have to look this up, but most people are not doing that. So
Yeah, fair. We'll take a short little break. When we come back, I want to talk about some more plant-based related things, including plant-based meats. So we'll take a short break and we'll be back on the niche thing.
Hey everyone, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. Listeners, presenting to you Club Vartalab, the premier tier offering for our podcast. Here you get a number of perks, like access to extra bits and clips from the episodes, completely unfiltered, uncut and raw. The chance of watching or listening to the full episodes 2 days before the official release. An absolutely free of cost entry to the Vartalab Just Us live shows. That's right, stories in person. Occasional live streams of the episode tapings on YouTube, an exclusive members-only Telegram group with Akash and Naveen, and you also get your name on the producer slate at the end credits of the episodes. Whoa, that's a lot. So go on to youtube.com/@Vartalab and click on the join button to become a member now. On Cock and Bull, Cyrus, Akash and Abbas discuss India's big win at the Oscars and the new move Berlin made of allowing women to swim topless in their country. On the Habit Coach podcast, Ajnan doles out tips to overcome inconsistencies while preparing for UPSC exams. And on Storytellers and Story Sellers, Vineet takes us through the films that have made it to the Oscar nominations and shares trivia about them. Once again, do not forget to visit our merch store on ivmpodcast.com. We've got some super cool and exciting stuff over there for you and your loved ones. Follow us on social media. We are at IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. If you like our shows, then do not forget to spread the word. You know, it really helps us a lot. And of course, don't forget to rate and review our shows on whatever platform you are listening to them. All our video shows are also available on youtube.com/IVM Podcast. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week: LIC of India, Yono SBI, Cash Free Payments, and HDFC Mutual Fund. Thank you so much for making this possible.
All right, we are back on the niche thing. I've got Luca with me all the way from Switzerland, and we're talking about plant-based diets. Luca, tell me one thing. Do people get surprised that you're vegan when they look at your physique? Because I'm assuming a lot of them would think you're just chugging whey protein all day long.
Yes, it's kind of funny. They still do to this day, and I see it as a compliment, to be honest, because what I see online is people telling like, "Hey, you cannot build muscles on a plant-based diet." But again, research shows that it's equal as of right now. That's at least what the scientific consensus tells us. But if they look at my body, they are sometimes really surprised. And if I scroll through the comments of some of my videos, I've seen people actually telling me like, "Hey, he didn't build all his muscles on a plant-based diet." I actually did, because I started working out 16 years ago, 1 year prior before I went plant-based. But during that year, I was really sick all the time, so I didn't really actually train. So they're still act surprised, but not as surprised as maybe 5 or 6 years ago, because informations actually are getting out there, and there's more great vegan athletes out there that have a much better physique than I do and are showing how you can eat or actually build muscles on a plant-based diet. So
in India, we're seeing a lot more plant-based protein available. I'm seeing multiple brands that have cropped up, and a lot of them who were predominantly earlier doing only whey are also doing plant-based protein. That in India has become pretty decent and pretty affordable, pretty much similarly priced to whey proteins. I want to touch upon a few more things. Uh, One is plant-based meat. Like, what's your like? This is a very personal thing, right? What's your take on it?
my take is, I think it's great. Great in the sense, so let's divide it into two topics. Plant-based meats. Is it healthy? And is it more sustainable? Let's touch upon the sustainable part, the environmental impact that meat alternatives have first. Absolutely. 80% of the agricultural lands gets used up by animal agriculture, and they only provide 20% of the calories, of the worldwide calories. So it's a very inefficient model that we actually created. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I've read some studies in which you can basically read that by growing plants, transporting plants, feeding those plants to animals over and over again until they get big enough to get slaughtered, we lose around 90% of proteins in the process, basically, until you have the meat basically in front of your plate. So it's much more efficient to opt to meat alternatives, basically, just for this sake alone. And that's the first thing. Now let's go to the meat part, the health part, sorry, because that's a little bit more kind of like, controversial.
Yeah.
And I'm going to give you a very boring answer. It depends. It depends on the brands and on the ingredients that are inside. Now, here in Switzerland, we have a great healthy meat alternative. They basically just have 3 ingredients in it: dehydrated pea protein, a little bit of salt, a little bit of oil, which is really low in really low in saturated fats, and a little bit higher in unsaturated fats, which are the healthier fats for you. And that's it. And it tastes great. Obviously, they have different kinds of tastes attached to
Yeah.
it, and So you always want to look at the ingredients. Now, there are certain brands which are really high in sodium, are really high in saturated fats, although there are plant-based meat alternatives. Those are not healthy, but I would like to make an example. One of my clients asked me like, hey, Luca, is it okay to eat the plant-based burger, which I had in his meal plan as well? And he was like, I'm just eating a brand, and that brand has a higher saturated and sodium intake on their ingredients list. And I'm telling him like, how many times do you want to eat that? And he's like, I really love it. I want to eat it 3 times per week. And then I told him like, you know what? You're eating 28 meals per week. 25 of those 28 meals, I know what you're eating, is filled with whole plant-based foods, basically. And meals that you love and enjoy eating. What, in comparison, what are those 3 meals you're eating? So, and out of these 3 meals, it's just the patty that is a little bit unhealthy.
Yeah.
So on the grand scheme, it doesn't actually do much if you look at it from this perspective. And restricting yourself from, I once read a couple of immunologists like studies and books and stuff like that, and they always talk about socializing is a big aspect as well.
Yeah.
If you are restricting yourself from going out because your friends go to a fast food restaurant, obviously, if you don't want to eat the food, don't eat it. But if you have an overall healthy diet, like I explained earlier, if you just go out once per week and socialize with your friends, restricting yourself from having that social event, creating great memories with your friends, might be more detrimental to your overall health than actually, just not going. So,
Oh, fair enough.
yeah, that's basically my point of view. Just if you want to play it really, safe, there's great brands out there that also just don't put. I mean, the amount of ingredients isn't actually what determines if it's healthy. It's more like the sodium intake and the saturated fat content that you want to have an eye on. So just be careful with that. And again, if you just eat it once per week and you enjoy the brand, go for it.
I'm actually excited to see the future of lab grown meat. I think it'll be
Mhm.
interesting to see when that kind of starts to become mainstream or a little more popular, what the impact of both nutrition and sustainability is. Uh, one more question. Is it a lot more expensive to be in this lifestyle? And again, I'm also talking about a little more context on India, where a lot of times, like eggs are super cheap. Eggs are super cheap in India. It's a great source of protein and it's super cheap. Uh, from a practical angle, how is affordability at play here at all?
That's another great question as well. And boring answer, it depends. It depends as actually with every diet because you find protein and fiber rich sources on nearly all diets that are maybe a little bit cheaper and a little bit more expensive. So we talked about meat alternatives beforehand. Those are obviously on the upper
Yeah.
end of the expensive charts, right? However, if you compare them to their animal-based counterpart, you can see that the prices are on par with kind of like certain meat and other animal-based products. My personal diet consists of whole plant-based foods. For example, I'm eating tons of fruits, dried fruits, nuts, seeds, and tofu, tempeh, and so on and so forth. And those are usually on the cheaper part of the plant-based kind of like expense list, if you want. So it all depends how you structure your diet, basically. Um, on certain foods, if you want to play it a little bit cheaper, many people struggle, for example, to buy organic foods. My recommendation to all people, this is advice that might actually be accessible to not only plant-based eating people, but to people overall. If you want to buy organic foods and you don't have the money to do so, simply buy unorganic foods which you're not eating the skin of it. For example, a banana. You're opening up the banana, and the banana is kind of like engulfed from the skin because you're not eating the skin. You can easily buy those in an organic form without actually having the fear that so many pesticides and herbicides are residing into the banana. So you can kind of like limit that expenses. But however, if you eat apples, it's might a little bit better to go organic. But honestly, just do whatever you can. And this is also a big part of our environment that we are living in, because the more usually, apart from the foods I mentioned, potatoes, legumes, for example, lentils, dal, right, in India, it's super cheap. You can buy them, and it's a great protein source as well. However, the cheapest foods are usually the junk foods that are laying around that taste great, make us addicted. And a new trial, a randomized control trial, has done something very interesting recently. And they matched the fiber intake with kind of like both diets. One diet was 80% junk food, 20% healthy foods. And the other one was vice versa, 80% whole plant-based foods, 20% junk food. They matched it, and they just wanted to see that they had all, so it was a clinical trial, meaning they had all the participants confined into that clinic. So they controlled literally for anything. And they told them like, hey, we will provide you with the meals, but if you're hungry, eat more, eat more snacks. But just tell us what snacks you're using. I mean, they're controlling them anyway.
Yeah.
And found out that although the fibers were matched and everything else was matched, participants eating the junk food diet ate many hundreds more of calories in the form of snacks because they were not satisfied. The micronutrients, we don't know the mechanisms why that is. The researchers hypothesized maybe due to the high sodium, high fat intake, and so on and so forth, maybe lacking micronutrients such as minerals and vitamins. But it's a problem. We are eating foods. We are basically overfeeding ourselves while also being malnourished at the same time. So that's the problem that we have today. But yeah, circling back to your question, I know I went a little bit away from it. It depends what you're eating. As I mentioned before, dal, fruits, vegetables such as greeny leaf vegetables, potatoes, and so on and so forth are really cheap. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, I guess. So it depends what you want to eat, basically.
Fair. Any other tips for people who might want to take small steps to get into a more plant-based diet?
So the blueprint, kind of like that we talked about earlier, is basically like the best approach.
Yeah.
Apart from that, don't shy away from maybe following a bunch of plant-based creators out there and reach out to them. Most people don't bite. They're actually happy to help without charging you anything. And I mean
Any
that in a sense.
suggestions? Any suggestions on these?
Oh, so I follow Plant to You is one of those creators. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She basically creates tasty recipes out of literally anything. So plant-based on a budget and other great tasty recipes. So you can follow her. And there's many great books. One of which is I'm actually not recalling the name. It's Fiber Fueled, I guess. It's by a great vegan doctor, and he also has great gut healthy recipes for you. And overall, if you just type in, I know I'm getting back to that, but I want to give people like really accessible information, and what better way to do so than hopping on the internet.
Yeah.
If you type in whole plant-based food recipes and type the word in quick whole plant-based food recipe, you see that you can find great overnight oats recipes that you can do in 5 minutes, and breakfast is ready next morning. You can easily create a sandwich with whole grain bread, for example, which has tons of fibers, micronutrients in it. with maybe some cashew cheese on top of it and sprinkle a little bit of green leaf vegetables. And there you go. You see, we already checked like 5 of the boxes
Yeah.
that I talked about earlier. So,
Fair.
but just don't feel, if you feel overwhelmed, just take a step one at a time and do it your time. You have all the time in the world. So,
Fair. What's your, can you also share your social media handles?
yes. So if people want to follow me, you can basically type in Luca Fit Health on your favorite social media apps. So you can find me on TikTok, you can find me on Instagram, and you can also find me on YouTube as well.
Great. Luca, thank you so much for being here. I'm pretty sure we'll be in touch. And thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much, Anish, for having me and giving me the opportunity to speak to such a broad audience.
My
And
pleasure.
yeah, it was tons of fun. So thank you so much.
Thank you.